Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for your attendance. You're all looking well. Hopefully you're fresh and got coffee and we don't bore you to tears and put you to sleep. My name's Greg Kingsley. I'm the product manager here at Ness. It'll be running through half of this webinar for you, and we'll also hand you over to Aaron for some programming part of it. So we're going to do this in a couple of stages. What we'll do is we're just going to have a very brief introduction to the Z-Wave range. Then we'll go through the Z-Wave gateway, the introduction of it and how to program it to set it up. At that stage we'll stop and ask any questions that you may have on the Z-Wave part of things, and then we'll go on to the automation bridge, which is the voice control for using the Google Home, Alexa, etc. to control the M1. So we'll kind of do, and then we'll answer more questions at the end. So what I'm going to do, if we can hang on to any questions that you may have towards the end of the session or at the question time, there is a dialog box that you can type questions in. We won't be answering those as we go. We'll do them at the end of each section, so in case we answer the question a couple of slides later. So if you've got any questions, you can either type it there, hang on to them to the end, and we'll see how we go. Okay. First of all, as I said, we don't want to turn this into a Z-Wave training session. Hopefully people are a little bit familiar with what Z-Wave is, but we'll cover it a little bit without getting too deep into it. Z-Wave is one of the automation systems that are out on the market. Can control basically anything that you can dream of. There's thousands and thousands of modules. It's an open protocol. In Australia, we run on 921.42 megahertz. Other countries run at different frequencies, so Australia and New Zealand uses the same, the US runs a different market, Asia runs a different frequency, Europe runs a different frequency, etc. So if you see units on Z-Wave modules online, just be aware of it, that one of them, they may be a different frequency, they won't work here. And the second thing is that they may not be part of the Z-Wave Alliance approval. So just be aware of cheaper imports. There are a lot of junk around. We only use good quality from AO Tech, which is really the world leading from Z-Wave, but there's a lot of other products on the market that you can use. Z-Wave is a mesh system, so from the main controller, this way is the gateway, it does frequency hop between modules, so it doesn't go straight from the controller to the end device. It does hop between them. So in theory, the more devices you put on, it can help coverage because we got the sorry about that, I'll just mute people so we haven't got a lot of noise in the background. Okay, so just going on, so what happens is it does frequency hop from product to product to help in the transmission going along. So in theory, the more devices you got can help the transmission. They'll only talk from one device to the other when they're programmed in or paired into the system. So from the gateway, what you do, you put it into a learn mode or program mode, and then on the device, each device or Z-Wave device has a little program or learn button. So when the controller is in a learn button, you select what type of module you're going to learn in, whether it be a smart switch that can just plug into a PowerPoint, whether it be a globe, whether it be another smart switch or dimmer that can go behind a light switch, etc. in the wall. You select that what type of module, and once it's in learn mode, you just go to the device with it powered up and press its program button, and it then sends a learn signal, whether it be frequency hop through there. And at the same time, it's got some other smarts that it will also recognize what modules are around it, so it builds its own mesh as it goes up. So the controller builds a mesh and the devices create a mesh, so it knows that this unit has to talk to that one, etc. And if we're talking to that unit, it knows you can go that way if you had to, if this link here was broken, but it knows the quickest way is there to there to there. So it's smart enough to build a network when you do it. So it's a good practice, not mandatory, but it's a good practice when you're learning a device in, that if we're learning this device light switch in here, then to put it in the location where it's going to be installed in relation to the other gateway, so it can build its mesh and know what partners are around on the way to the gateway back there. If you programmed it all in one office and then put it out in the field, it's got to rebuild the mesh live on the network, so it's best to do it while it's learning in. We sell a range of Z-Wave modules. This is just a small example of what we can sell, whether it be a smart switch, a smart switch 5, just plugs into a power point, and then you can plug a lamp or kettle or whatever you want in there. There's a smart switch 6, which pretty well does the same thing. It's just a lower profile module. It does have a USB on it. I think they're twice the price as the smart switch 5. It's just a generation 5 and generation 6. We've also got globes, whether it be a bayonet cap or Edison screw, that can screw straight into a base, and it can send the signal directly to the globe to turn on and turn off. We've also got modules, these nano in-wall switches, whether it be a dimmer or whether it be just an on-off switch. So what happens is you take your 240 volts off the light switch itself, put the 240 volts into the 240 volt input, then from the light switch you can wire into the switch input, and you can still turn the switch on and off manually from the light switch, or you send a signal to it from the gateway or the controller to turn it on and off. With the dimmer, exactly the same thing, power goes in, but what this case, instead of using an on-off toggle switch into the switch input, you use a bell press, so it's push and hold to ramp up, push and hold to ramp down, and these little slim modules sit directly behind a light switch. There's other things, there's the dual or quad wall mount, and they battery operated, so you can just screw them onto the wall, program them in, so when that button's pushed it can turn a light on and off. When that button's pushed it can dim a light up and down, so you can use that as a light switch and just put it anywhere. It doesn't have to have 240 volt wide connected to it. And there's other things also like multi-sensors. A multi-sensor has got 6 sensors built into one. It's got vibration sensor, it's got heat, it's got motion detection, it's got humidity, and a couple of others. So for example, if you're putting that in a bathroom, you might say when motion is picked up, then to turn the nano switch on to turn the light on. When humidity builds up in it, then send a signal to the smart switch 5 to turn that on, which might turn the fan on. So it's just a multi-purpose motion sensor, or multi-sensor I should say. Other things like garage door sensors or controllers as well. So we've got a lot in the range, but as I said, these are ones, if you've got from other sources, any of the Z-Wave devices that are approved for Australia will work into the gateway. We can put up to 254 nodes, or 254 lights if you want to call it, 254 Z-Wave modules onto a network. It depends on what gateway you use. The one that we sell will control easily between 60 to 100. There's another plus version that if you want to go up to the full 254 nodes. And the gateway itself is also a node. So because it learns into the network, it's still a node, and then you can put 253 extra devices onto it. All Z-Wave modules are repeaters in themselves, so they're transceivers. So if you've got a long distance from getting from one Z-Wave device to the other, and every module in between is a repeater, but if you've just got a gateway and you've got a light a long way away and there's nothing in between, we do have repeaters that will just plug into a power point and they just repeat the signal. So if you have got an issue with range from one end to the other, then you can put repeaters in the middle. This is our little Z-Wave gateway. For those who are familiar with Z-Wave, it's the hardware we don't design ourselves. It's part of the Vera range. It's the Vera Edge, but it has got our own Ness M1 plug-in into it that's fully 2A, etc. So it's a very small size. If you imagine, it's about a bit bigger than a cigarette box in layman's terms. It's got a LAN port on there. There's built-in Wi-Fi, so it communicates back to the customer's router on Wi-Fi. USB for future use, so effectively what you're doing, you're powering it up off 12 volts, plugging it into the customer's LAN, and it then communicates with the M1. So when you plug the gateway into the customer's router, has internet connection, the gateway's got obviously a built-in Z-Wave RF transceiver in there, and it will then communicate to all your Z-Wave devices out in the field. It is a standalone unit, so if you don't have an M1, you can still use it as a Z-Wave controller, and it will work standalone. It programs fully via a web browser, so you just open up on the customer's network, you open up a web browser, log into the gateway, and you get all the GUI, etc. in there. You can do it remotely as well via the internet. It does have an app, so you can turn lights on and off with the app. by the local or remote. And from that app you could turn, for example, when you turn a Z-Wave light on, you can get that to do something on the M1, so it is full two-way. So that's working 100% standalone even without an M1, and that's what we're talking about, best to program the Z-Wave devices in situ when you program it in. So when we plug it into an M1, you use the M1 Ethernet module obviously on there as well. So the M1 into the Ethernet to put it onto the customer's network. Once it's on the network, plugs into Z-Wave, and from the Z-Wave, we'll have a look at the programming in a moment, you put the IP address of the M1 in there, it will go to the M1 and auto sync and suck the data out of there. So as we update light names, for example, in an M1, and we call it, warehouse, showroom, living room, kitchen, whatever you want to call it, as you program in an M1 and get out of program mode, it auto syncs and will bring it into the GUI inside the Z-Wave interface. And then we can program it what you want it to do. So when you turn an M1 light on, which of the Z-Wave lights do you want to turn on? So at this stage, I'll hand you over to Aaron. He'll go through the programming of the Z-Wave gateway. Obviously, you're not going to remember this. It's just an overview to give you a thing. There is a quick guide on step-by-step pretty well what Aaron's going to go through now, as well as there is on our YouTube channel, there'll be instructional video on how to do it as well. So this is just an overview, and then we can have any questions at the end of this. Hand you over to Aaron.
Hi everyone, I'm setting up the Z-Wave gateway for the first time. You obviously just connect with LKP, with the XCP. You do need to make sure that you're using a static IP address in the M1 XCP. Setting a DHCP IP address obviously is going to keep changing, so it has to be a static IP address. You need to use the non-secure port in the M1 XCP. This is obviously going to be a local connection, so it's safe to use on the local network. If you're going to use it over the internet, such as with the apps, that's when you use the secure port. It's also important that you have the transmit options enabled from the globals under the special tab. Having all those enabled will make it so you can get the status of each light and each task that you're using on the Z-Wave gateway. For all the names that you're going to be using, or all the devices that you're going to be using, you need to make sure that you have a zone with a name. If you're going to be if you're going to be using zones, if you're using lights, outputs and tasks, you need to also make sure the show box is ticked next to the device that you're going to be using in the Z-Wave gateway. It's also then important to disconnect from LKP. If you're connected with LKP, the protocols obviously stop working and they don't work while you're connected, so you have to be disconnected, and it's recommended to wait about a minute, 2 minutes after you disconnect before you try to connect and do anything with the M1, because obviously it takes a few minutes to initialize after the disconnection. It's also important that you only have one network card enabled on your computer. If you have Wi-Fi and also LAN enabled, just disable one of them. As long as your network that you're going to be using is on the customer's network with internet connection, then it should work. At this stage, you should connect your Z-Wave gateway to the customer's network, as well as the M1, which has the M1 XCP on there. It does take about a minute, maybe 2 minutes to fully boot up. Once you've powered up your Z-Wave gateway, you need to go to home.getvera.com. Sign into your account if you have one. If not, you can click on the button on the left there that will activate your setup for the first time. Then you need to click on add another controller. This will search your network to see if you have any controllers on your network. In this case, it's asking which controller that you want to set up. In our case, it's the Vera Edge that we need to set up. It will then discover the device on your network. Simply select it and it will then display the IP address of your device. Once you click on that, it's going to do some updating with the cloud and also download some extra files into your Vera. Once it's fully completed, you click on Go to Dashboard up the top right hand corner, and then you will be able to click on the Connect button, which will then connect to the local IP address of your Z-Wave gateway, and it will then run through a wizard, finalize your setup, which will ask for your name, email address, phone number, the name of your controller that you're setting up. Once the wizard is completed, it's time to install the M1 plugin, which we developed here at Ness. It's a plugin that you go to like a special app store within this, inside the actual gateway itself, and the app is free. You click on that and install it. Simply search for Ness M1, click on details once you find it in the list, and click on the install button. This will then install the plugin to your controller. It may take about 2 minutes to fully complete. It will say down the bottom there, it is now safe to exit this screen. You can just click on the exit button and it will move on to the next screen. Once it's installed, you click on My Apps from the left-hand side menu. You go create the device. Since we've only just installed the plugin, now we need to create it. So we click on Create Device. From there, you click on Devices on the left-hand side, and then you find the Ness M1 device that are added, and you click on the right arrow next to it. You click on the Advanced down the bottom there. In here, we need to make sure we put the M1's IP address in the field. You get obviously the M1 XEP's IP address. You put the IP address. Don't forget to put the colon in between the IP address and then the port number. In our case, it's a non-secure port. So the IP address, colon, and then the port number. Then you click on the back button in the web browser and then click on the Save Changes button. This next step is important. You need to go into Settings, Net and Wi-Fi, and then you need to click on the Reboot button. Most people are probably thinking, well, I'll just power down the unit by pulling the power cable out and plugging it back in again. That doesn't actually work properly. You need to go into the reboot menu because it saves some configuration details into the actual Z-Wave gateway when it does the reboot this way. By just powering it down, unplugging the cable and plugging it back in, wipe some of the settings that it's trying to save, and next time you try to boot up, it's not going to work properly. While it's booting up, you'll see the LEDs on the front light up. They all need to be lit up before you can connect to the gateway again. It does take about 3 to 5 minutes after the reboot for it to fully boot up after applying these settings. Once all the settings are being applied and you're logged back in again, you'll be able to see all the M1 devices that you had saved in the M1 itself appear in the list. In this list, it allows you to toggle the outputs, allows you to toggle the lights, and also you can see that you'll see tasks in there as well. You can actually click on the little toggle button, which the task will then activate from the M1. So this is actually the M1's devices that you're seeing in the list. It's then time to set up a scene, which is similar to an M1 rule, which you can make it say whenever the M1 light turns on, turn the Z-Wave light on. Then you can also write another scene, which might be for an M1 motion sensor. When the M1 motion detection is detected, it can then turn on the Z-Wave light. So a scene works similar to an M1 rule. Each scene will have a whenever and a then, similar to like an M1, whenever this happens, then do that. A scene on the Z-Wave gateway can have a delayed action, so you may have something like a motion detection detects, then you might have it make it so it waits 10 seconds before it turns the light on instead of just turning the light on straight away. And each scene will need to be written twice. So one for the on function and another scene for the off function. So let's just say, for an example, you have a M1 light. When the M1 light turns on, you want to turn on the Z-Wave light. That'll be one scene. Then you have to write another scene. When the M1 light turns off, then turn the Z-Wave light off. And the scene is also triggered based on the location in the list, similar to the M1 rules, where it starts at the top of the list and scrolls through the rules. It's similar with the scenes. So to set up a scene, you click on Scenes on the left-hand side. You click on the Add Scene button. You then need to select a device from the list. So when you click on, I want a device to turn on or off, or in our example, we're going to be using an M1 light that we're going to control. So we selected the M1 light from the list. We then say we want it when this device turns on or off. It then allows you to select, is it turning on or off from the list? Click on the Next Step button. So we've just done the trigger event, which is similar to like a whenever this happens. We then select our devices. So in our case, we're going to control the Z-Wave light. So we click on the Z-Wave light. And then we're selecting, we want to make the light turn on. So when the M1 light turns on, we're going to turn the Z-Wave light on. So you choose light on and the dimmer value. So we can actually make it like 50% instead of being on full brightness, or in our case 100%. And we're going to make the light bulb go red. Obviously, because it's a light bulb, we can actually do the dimmable value and also change the color. If it was obviously an output that we're triggering, like a Z-Wave output, like a smart switch, you'll just have the on-off toggle only. You won't obviously get to choose what color because there is no color to choose. Once you've done that, you click on the validate button down the bottom right-hand corner. You click on the next step, and then you give the scene a name. So in our case, we're just going to call it gym light on, and then you click on the finish button. So that's one scene that we've just added. So when the M1 light turns on, it's going to turn our Z-Wave light on. But if we turn the M1 light off, it's not going to do anything. It's going to keep the Z-Wave light on. So we do need to write that same scene again the second time, except we do the opposite values. We say whenever the M1 light turns off, we need to turn the Z-Wave light off instead of on. So in our case, we're going to have two scenes to do the same task. So one's going to be for the on scene and one's for the off scene.